Binding a quilt is the final step in creating a beautiful, finished project. It's the process of sewing a strip of fabric around the edges of your quilt to give it a clean, polished look while also preventing the edges from fraying. Here's a simple guide on how to bind a quilt by machine. To prepare your binding strips, first cut them to a width of about 2.5 inches, though check your quilt pattern for any specific measurements. The length should be enough to go around your quilt, a few extra inches for overlap. If needed, sew multiple strips together to achieve the required length. Next, press the strips in half lengthwise with the wrong sides together, creating a long, narrow strip. This will be the binding that you will attach to your quilt. Make sure the folds are even for a neat finish. To attach the binding to the quilt front, start by aligning the raw edges of the binding with the edge of the quilt. Leave a 6 to 8 inch tail of binding at the beginning and begin sewing from the edge. As you approach the corners, stop a 1/4 inch from the edge. For mitered corners, lift the presser foot, pivot the quilt, and fold the binding up at a 45-degree angle. Lower the presser foot and continue sewing along the next side. Keep sewing all the way around the quilt until you reach your starting point, leaving an overlap of about 6 to 8 inches to join the binding ends later. When you reach the point where your binding strip overlaps, trim the ends at a 45-degree angle to ensure they meet correctly. Lay one end on top of the other, making sure the fabric is aligned properly, and stitch them together to form a continuous loop. Fold the binding over to the back of the quilt, ensuring it covers the raw edge where you attached the binding. Use pins or wonder clips to secure the binding in place along the back edge, making sure it stays neatly folded as you work your way around the quilt. To stitch the binding to the back, sew along the edge of the binding on the front side of the quilt, close to the folded edge, to attach it securely. You can use the stitch in the ditch technique, which stitches in the seam where the quilt top and binding meet, or sew directly along the binding for a more visible stitch. For a creative touch, you can also use a decorative stitch to finish the binding, adding a fun and personal flair to your quilt. With the binding securely attached, your quilt is now fully finished, giving it a clean, polished look and protecting the edges from fraying. This final step adds a beautiful, professional touch to your hard work. Whether you are keeping it for yourself or gifting it to someone special, your quilt is now ready to be admired and used.